artwork focuses on using femme and non-binary bodies to initiate a dialogue about issues facing the disabled. They currently sit on a board of the Kansas Disability Caucus and on the Expressions Curatorial and Organizing Committee through the Whole Person as their disabled artist representative. Kathryne's current activism and art focus is breaking down the barriers of how disabled bodies are viewed in contemporary art and in society, bringing awareness to the lack of accessibility within the Kansas City art scene, and discussing the intersection of domestic violence, disability, and queerness. I think that's a great overview of what your body of work is about at the Artist Coalition, and I'm very excited to have you here and through Zoom. So welcome.
Thank you so much. That was a great introduction. So, so obviously I'm Kathryne Grimm, and I'm going to start off by just kind of reading the series statement about, so Invisible Victims examines the internal narrative of a disabled domestic violence victim while they are living with their abuser, and functions as a voice for victims of an epidemic that is never addressed. We follow the invisible victim as they experience severe isolation, represented by a stark, dark background and often solitary presence. Though evidence of the abuser is always present through the symbolic use of the color red. We continue through observing them experiencing a denial of bodily autonomy, woven in numerous pieces either through the use of hands violating the figure, smeared lipstick, or blindfolds and gags. We then follow them as they experience torture, with drops of blood symbolic for the abuser's actions. This victim cries for help, but their cries go unanswered, and they, inevitably, stand alone, cradling their head in their hands, left by society to endure their unexitable circumstances. We finally find them at the end of the series, covered in their own blood, as a subversive Madonna, a failure of societal expectations of disability to be inspiring and function as inspiration porn to the non-disabled. Instead of society creating avenues of assistance, the invisible victim is judged for not performing perfect inspirational disability. So I want to go ahead and give a trigger warning as well as a content warning for anybody that is joining us today. I will be discussing sexual assault as well as domestic violence. So if this is going to be triggering for you, or you feel you can't handle something like this, then I completely understand. I just want to give everyone a heads up before we begin. All right, so give me just a moment here. This is my first time doing like screen sharing and things like that. Let me see here. So let us, hopefully you'll be able to see my screen. Host disabled participant screen sharing. Anybody fix that?
I just sent a co-host to make you a co-host. Did that work?
Perfect. Yay. All right. All right. All right. Can everybody see that? My screen okay?
Yes. Yep.
Awesome.
Good.
All right. So I'm going to be introducing my series Invisible Victims. I'm kind of going through one by one and just kind of talking about each piece and, the meanings behind it, how I created it, if it's applicable, and some of the symbolism in it. And I know I put in a couple of behind the scenes shots as well. So, all right. All right, so I want to start out by showing off my piece, 2,555 days, inches. This piece is 2,555 inches of red yarn embroidered into a rectangle of my wedding dress. Inside the wedding dress, it has been burnt and scorched, and I've embroidered the word 7 into it with a portion of the 2,555 inches of red yarn. There are 2,555 days in 7 years. And I wanted to get across have a visual of just how long that is, just how long it is to live with abuse for 2,555 days, and to give kind of this scope of how much 7 years is. And I wanted it to be my wedding dress, and I wanted to destroy it and use it in a way that people could look at it and learn something from this. That within the whole series, I want people to come away understanding that this is an invisible epidemic that nobody talks about, that disabled people are the most at-risk group for domestic violence, and yet nobody talks about that. When I'll be having a panel discussion on June 17th with a number of people actually talking about how the systems in place aren't set up for disabled people. That when I left, which was a year and a month ago, from my domestic violence situation, that I called shelters, I called organizations, I called everyone, and either they didn't have any accessible accommodations for me or accessible resources, or they didn't have accessible shelter. And if they did have accessible shelter, it was already used because there is such a high demand for it, that it just goes like that, because disabled people are predominantly the victims of domestic violence. So with this series and with this work in particular, I wanted to get that across, and that message of this is a serious issue that needs to be addressed, and we need to look at the magnitude of what that time with the abuser looks like. Right, so this is my piece at least 3 times. This piece addresses the statistic that you try to leave at least 3 times from a domestic violence situation. We see her with her head wrapped in red yarn that is symbolic of the cage that an abuser puts you into, where you are trapped almost inside yourself. And when I personally, for myself, I also tried to leave 3 times, and it took the 3rd time in order for me to get out. That I would reach out to people and ask them for help, and the response back to me was, I really can't help you. I mean, you should just be glad that you have someone there that takes care of you. And insinuating the fact that me being disabled is such a burden to care for me, that I should just be grateful for anything that I'm given, because it's this idea, and this pervasive idea, that disabled people don't deserve love stories and we don't deserve happy endings, that disabled people are hardly ever viewed as sexual beings. And so the idea that I walked into a police station and I was trying to give a statement to a police officer, and the police officer turned to me and said, "You should be grateful somebody wants to fuck you," and told me to leave. So these are the kinds of experiences that disabled people face. These are, societal prejudices and societal preconceived notions about what it is to be disabled and what it means to live as a disabled person, that really taint our view of how to deal with them when they become domestic violence victims. That when they're not your typical victim, that they don't know how to deal with the very individual needs that disabled people require when it comes to leaving situations of abuse. That you know, there are so many obstacles already for just an able-bodied domestic violence victim. But when you add into the fact that perhaps the abuser is the person's caretaker, and then the only person that understands how to do any of their kind of medical procedures or clean things for them, such as feeding tubes or trachs or, you know, oxygen, whatever it could be. And perhaps this person also helps them use the restroom. And these are things that you have to consider when you're a person with a disability, because you can't just get up and go. I have a friend who I'll be talking with on the 17th, where she had to wait 8 weeks in order to file the restraining order because she was waiting for medical supplies to come in. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to receive them. So there are so many more obstacles than it comes to, well, how come you didn't just leave? Because sometimes the barrier is literal accessibility, where you cannot physically exit your own home. In my case, that played a lot into it, that since I am partially blind, I cannot drive and thus do not own a car, and was unable to leave. And I didn't have any access to money because financial abuse was a part of the situation. And so there wasn't a way for me to call and get a taxi or get an Uber, that wasn't a possibility for me. Like I said, I reached out to friends and they wouldn't help. And so there's so many more obstacles, and we need to be looking, you know, as a society and within organizations that help domestic violence victims, to really make it accessible, you know, make these programs accessible, make shelters accessible, and then cater to the very individual needs and concerns of disabled people. So this is a little bit of behind the scenes of creating that piece. My friend Bella was the model for this, and she was absolutely amazing and really supportive of the whole process. The day of the shoot was very emotional for me, and also incredibly cathartic as well. And she was really, really great about understanding my vision for what I wanted these to look like, understanding exactly how to emote, and being so patient as I just tediously wrapped just yarn and yarn and yarn around her head and took it like a champ. All right, so this is the piece that I referenced just a little bit earlier. It's At Least You Have Someone Who Takes Care of You. And this is the invisible victim, that we can see the after effects of it. Like we see the viscera, we see the blood, we see everything that the abuser has done, hence the red. And when society hears about these things and hears about these deaths or serious injuries from domestic violence, that never is it mentioned that this is a disabled person, or we only hear about this disabled person if there's a news article about it, but it's always depersonalized. And so we constantly hear about the domestic violence, but the victims that are the most at risk for it are completely invisible. So we see her gurney height, dripping with blood and viscera, and still with us unable to see who they are. That's a little bit of a close-up view of the piece. This was literally just yarn, PVA glue, and spray paint. And I did this over a mold of a mannequin in order to give it that kind of otherworldly, not quite make out the face feel to it. All right, so this is my piece, Blood. And this is from a very, very personal experience where so let me be very clear, this series is very much so about my personal experiences with domestic violence, as well as other disabled domestic violence victims, but I'm wholly drawing from my own experience with this series. And so this was a time when I truly felt like I was being surrounded in the blood, surrounded in the abuse, and unable to get out, constantly reaching out and asking for help, and nothing was coming from it. And so I basically sat there just having to experience the abuse with absolutely nothing and no way to stop it. And so this is not only symbolic of actual blood, it is symbolic of the abuse, and how, for me personally, it always feels like I'm drowning. And it's heavy, heavy on my chest, and it feels like I can't get air. And that was the feeling that I felt throughout the 2,555 days with my ex. So this is my piece, Can't Stop It. And this piece is about sexual assault, which is something that I experienced regularly in my former relationship. And I use the symbolism of the pomegranate because it means sexuality. And I wanted to show how sexuality can be tainted in the case of of sexual assault. And how, especially in the case of disabled people, when we're already fighting to be viewed as sexual people. And then when you add on to the layers of that, us striving like, hey, see me as someone that can be sexual, see me as somebody that can be a romantic prospect, see me as having the ability to have a relationship. And then it is completely just has this cloud and is tainted when you're being sexually assaulted, because it's taking the very thing you're screaming at people to listen to and to understand, and is then using that against you. And it's a violation on so many levels that go so deep. And so I wanted to get that across. I wanted to get across the fact that she was being violated. And so I wanted to do a smeared lipstick. Once again, the red is symbolic of the abuser, and the abuser is always there. So even though we don't see the abuser in these pictures, they're there. And I wanted her to be kind of resigned to the inevitability of these sexual assaults taking place, because there's literally no way to fight back. That for me personally, my ex was much larger than me. And with all of the disabilities I have, I'm completely unable to fight back. And so you kind of, even though you are so upset, and it is gut-wrenching and horrific, you just take it. And nobody likes to talk about that. And there's others in the series where I also bring up sexuality, that there are aspects when you're disabled, and even if you're not disabled, that you have to do things in the midst of domestic violence and sexual assault in order to stay alive. And people don't like, from the outside, people don't like the decisions that you make and the choices that you do within the moment, because it takes away from the perfect victim narrative. The reality is there is no perfect victim. And just because this is the 725th time that this person has sexually assaulted you, there's no amount of saying no that's going to get this person off of you, because they feel that they're entitled to your body. All right, this is a little bit of behind the scenes from that piece. I had left the slices of pomegranate out for about 3, almost 4 weeks prior to the shoot. If that kind of gives you any idea how long these these shoots take me to plan, that I'm making props for it, you know, a month in advance. I let them get really nasty, just molded and dried and just like desiccated and awful. And I give it to Bella, that she not only had no qualms holding this moldy piece of fruit, but also like put some of it in her mouth, and she was amazing. All right, so this is failing at inspiration. And similar to at least you have someone who takes care of you, I made the face mask in the exact same way, where I did a mold of it over top of a mannequin. But it was just a mask. So this one is about the feeling that when you are disabled, it seems that the only acceptable way to be disabled is to be inspirational. You have to be overcoming something, or despite their disability, they ran this special race. And you're never allowed to just be a person. You're not allowed to just exist and be. That's the only acceptable disabled person is the one that people can post articles about. And isn't this person great? This football jock took them to the prom, and oh, wasn't that so great for them? And there was a recent article back, God, it seems like it was years and years ago, but apparently we had a Super Bowl this year, and that was this year. That there was an article that had to do with a young disabled man who won tickets to the Super Bowl. And the way that it was talked about, we actually didn't know why he won it or how he won it. All it did was talk about how inspiring he was, that he was literally just disabled and going to the Super Bowl. And it's that kind of thing that disabled people are judged on, that there's always an underlying expectation of, is there something about you that can benefit me? And the benefit me can look very, very different. It can look like, I need a token disabled person in my friend group. I need a token disabled person on my panel, that our individuality and our presence isn't actually valued beyond, you know, logistics or optics. And sometimes it's like I mentioned before, the friend that you can then show off to people, like, aren't I such a great person because I'm friends with this poor cripple? And these are the ideas that are so pervasive that we are, you know, fighting every day to, you know, remove these kinds of systemic ideas. And so in this case, we see the victim who is putting up a mask that is the abuser's actions, along with society abusing this victim. Because not only is this victim being abused by their partner, but then whenever they reach out for help, society is continually victimizing them as well, because they aren't stepping in to help, no matter how much this person is reaching out for help. So we see her trying to pull away the mask, and she is distressed and mournful that she has failed. She feels like she's failed society in some way, that there must be something wrong with her, or else society would come in and help. That, am I not performing inspirational disability enough in order to be seen as a human being? And so there's just multifaceted way of, that both being abused as well as reaching out for help can affect a disabled person. So this is my piece. It is He's There Every Day. And I think that's kind of, some of the symbolism behind it can be a little bit obvious in the fact that there are 7 figures here and there are 7 days in a week. And I wanted to illustrate the range of emotion and what it felt like over the course of a week. And so we have some days where you feel trapped and anxious to get out, and other days where you feel just so downtrodden, and other days where maybe there's a little bit of hope. And so I wanted to follow her throughout the week, and wherever the blindfold is what the abuser is doing on that particular day to silence the victim. And so on some days you have maybe, if their eyesight is covered on that day, that means that any kind of access to the outside world, any kind of resources that could possibly be available have been blocked. They are unable to leave. And then if their mouth is covered, that they've removed ways to reach out. They've removed communication devices or means of communicating with others outside of the situation. For myself, my ex would make me uninstall Facebook and Facebook Messenger and all forms of social media pretty regularly so that I couldn't communicate with my friends. And that was, and because I was so isolated already, because we lived way out at the very end of Johnson County, and that I was already so far away from my friends as it was. And then when he would cut off communication with them, it just compounded the isolation, that it was literally just me, him, and our child. And I was doing everything I could to protect my child as well as myself. And, I know obviously now that, I did everything that I could, but in the moment it felt like I was failing my child and trying to protect them from the abuse, because it wasn't just me, it was also my child. So this is the invisible victim, and she is the namesake of the series, because this piece encompasses all of it. That we see the effects of the abuser trapping her inside of this cage of red yarn. We see her clutching herself and in pain and in distress, and trying to show society and someone on the outside that this is what is going on. Look at what he is doing. Look at everything that I'm experiencing. Please come help me. And on her face, she is resigned, because she has made this outreach into the community so many times and each time been denied. So this piece is very, very personal to me, and because this is exactly what it felt like for me trying to leave. So this is It's Not What It Looks Like. And this is a kind of a picture where we see, when you're out in public with your abuser and you look like the happy couple, and maybe you look like you're in love and you're holding hands, and that it's not in any way, shape, or form what it looks like to the outside world, the picture that we paint on social media, the picture that we paint in public. But if people actually look and pay attention, which a couple of my friends did, and we can see in here that despite it looks like, oh, this could be a dance, or maybe it's a loving embrace and they're passionate with each other. But if you look closely, you can see how he's gripping her thigh and how there's an air of possessiveness to that, and how he is glaring, and that the signs are there if people look for them, but they're not always visible to everyone, because we are really good in this day and age of painting such a pristine view of ourselves on social media, which is why I always appreciate when people are so open and honest, either about their mental health struggles or their health issues, whatever it is that's going on in their life. I love the honesty. I don't feel like it's people complaining. Because of what I went through, to me, that honesty is refreshing. So please gripe, do whatever you need to do to get out anything that's happening in your life on Facebook. That I will not see that as any kind of, plea for attention, that it's the honesty and realness that was so lacking and I wasn't able to even talk about before. So this piece is really much so the victim and the abuser, not only the way that society sees you, but also the way it actually is simultaneously. So this piece is Take It Where I Can Get It. And here's where I'm going to talk about an aspect of sexual assault that no one likes to talk about. Sometimes when you're sexually assaulted, you might have an orgasm. And it doesn't mean that you wanted it. It doesn't mean that you were asking to be assaulted. It doesn't mean that somehow that sexual encounter becomes consensual. We do not have control over our bodies most of the time and the reactions that it has. But once again, people don't like to talk about that because it takes away from that perfect victim narrative. And just like I said before, there is no such thing as a perfect victim. So we see her with her lipstick smeared. That's a sign of that. That's what the abuser did. And she is holding up the pomegranate to her mouth, even though it is tainted and moldy and desiccated. And that she has this kind of yearning, lustful look on her face because she is yearning for that kind of enjoyment, that kind of sexuality that is constantly perverted. That she is still a sexual being and desires sexual touch, but the only sexual touch she is receiving is that from somebody that is continually sexually assaulting her. So there are so many conflicting emotions that happen when you're with someone for that long, being continually sexually assaulted, that when you try to take ownership of your sexuality, that you feel guilty and you feel like, well, maybe I had all of this coming all along. Maybe I actually wanted it. Is there, maybe this is all I can get. Maybe this is what I deserve. Because so often disabled people are told that we don't deserve good things like this. We don't deserve relationships, that we don't deserve healthy sexuality or sexuality at all. And so there are so many things that you are not only dealing with the abuse, but now you're also on top of that dealing with societal views of how you should be behaving, how you should be reacting, how you should be responding. And none of it will ever fit the expectations that society has for sexual assault survivors, domestic violence survivers. It is never going to look that pristine, perfect way that people want it to, that things are more complicated than that. It does not take away from the fact this person is absolutely a victim and they are absolutely being victimized. But people don't like to see the nuances of it. because it's uncomfortable. And you don't like to hear that, you know, maybe during a portion of a sexual assault, maybe it felt good. And because, like I said before, it takes away from the perfect victim narrative that this person is absolutely being sexually assaulted and they have no choice in this matter and their agency has been taken away from them. But society doesn't want to see how that is affecting a disabled person, how the multi-layers of shame and guilt that are compounded because they're a disabled person. There's already those layers when you're looking at assault to an able-bodied person, but then you have these systemic ideas of what you're supposed to be as a disabled person adding into those layers. So this is the damages, and this piece is specifically about a time when I could see the damages on my own body. And it's when you look in the mirror and you turn your back around and you're looking in the mirror to see the marks that have been left. And you are in a state of, I know this is going to be bad, but I have to see. And how gut-wrenching that is, that you go through so many emotional, levels when you have to see the after effects of what has been done, because it's a re-victimization that not only did you experience assault and sexual assault, but now you have the visible evidence of that in your face at all times, telling you just how abusive that person is. And so this piece addresses that and how it feels that the only person who is there for you during that time is yourself. And so she is cradling herself and holding herself because that is the only person that will. And this is, they all see, but they don't care. So this once again talks about how when you do reach out into public and you're telling people and you're screaming at them, I need help. I need somebody to come in and help me. I can't even leave the apartment by myself. And they can all see it. Either they can see they viewed abusive episodes. Maybe they saw your partner scream and yell at you, or you've shown them pictures, whatever it is that you have shown them and that they can see, they still won't come and help you because you're either going to be too complicated for them or too much of a burden for them to take care of. And it's this, pervasive idea that disabled people are a burden, and we're not. Everybody has needs. Everybody has ways where they need somebody to take care of or help them with. That nobody goes throughout an entire relationship or their life without experiencing times where somebody has to come in and help them with something. But for some reason, when it's for disabled people, we view those specific things that they need help with as being too much or a burden, when all of us across the board need help with something. So we look at this person and we see that they have called out for help, that people can see it, that you can see the dripping symbolic blood coming from their head, and yet no one cares. And so the only thing that you can do is be in isolation and try to work through it yourself, and it is not successful. So this is Trapped, and this is what it feels like while you're living with your abuser, and the way that it feels like there's so many hands that are pulling you down and keeping you there and keeping you in place, and you're constantly being violated and you're always touched and you never have bodily autonomy, and you are never in a state of rest or peace, that there's always something. And we see her cradling her literal heart, that is symbolic here for emotions and who she is, that she is a loving person and she has a heart to give, but that is, and she is trying to protect it and shelter it from the abuser, and that trying to not let the abuse affect her so that she can't give that heart in the future to someone else. And that this was something that the idea came to me that when I left my domestic, excuse me, I need to take a drink of water. When I left my domestic violence situation, one of the first things I did was go to therapy. I'm very much so pro-therapy. I think everyone should go to therapy. I'm Jewish, so we kind of have a tradition where it's very much so encouraged within the Jewish community that everybody needs an analyst. And if you aren't seeing an analyst, what's wrong with you? So I went to my therapist, and one of the things that she had said was that, wow, you're very resilient. And I was in it, and it hit me because I realized that she was absolutely correct, that I was somehow able to protect my heart throughout this and not let myself become jaded, not let myself put up walls, and not go into future relationships thinking that somehow that person would behave exactly as my ex did. And a part of that is how so often when, you know, if we are abused or somebody cheats on us, you know, whatever it is, that we can bring that into the next relationship. And because of the activism that I do, and because of, you know, where I'm constantly talking about people are individuals, no one's a monolith, and, you know, disability isn't a monolith, disabled people aren't monoliths, you know, one disabled person doesn't represent all disabled people. And so I now go into relationships or friendships looking at that person as an individual and not as the people that came before them. And I feel lucky that I'm able to do that, and that I know for a lot of people, rightfully so, they put up walls, and that's for a reason, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form shaming them for doing that. But this is about my personal experience with that. So this is where the series concludes. This is Subversive Madonna. And so I like to take iconography, specifically religious iconography, and subvert it and show how when we idolize or put a disabled person up on a pedestal of, you know, somehow this, you know, reaching a pinnacle of disability perfection, that deifying someone is just as harmful as objectifying someone, because either way, the person isn't human. That if we put them up on a pedestal and say, oh, they're godlike, they're saying, oh, look at them, they're so amazing, then we're dehumanizing them, just as if we were to say they're garbage, they're an animal. Because now you're setting up expectations for them that are completely unrealistic. And so we have the disabled person who is a victim completely drenched, just drenched in the blood from their abusers' attacks, from the experiences that they've gone through, that is standing there mocking society, saying, look at me now. Aren't I the perfect inspiration for you now? And aren't I the deity that you wish I was? And so this is my kind of, thumbing my nose at society, where this is what they want. They want us to be victimized and be silent about it, and to not be in any way, shape, or form human. And they want us to experience all of these things within closed doors, but don't talk about it because it makes me uncomfortable. And so this one is also, multifaceted, just like all of the other pieces in my series, where it's so many emotions and experiences layered and layered and layered upon each other. So that, let me see if I can do screen sharing off here. There we go. Awesome. So we have about 15 more minutes, and I thought that we could then open up the floor for any questions or comments that people have. Either Ash or Marissa, if you have any questions, please chime in, help get a conversation going.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking about all of that. It was a great slideshow, and takes a lot of bravery, and just knowing how to talk about this is a lot. So I
Thank you.
applaud you for that. Thank you. And I guess I'll just start with saying just a comment about how strong those images are, and how they are really yielding to this strong message that you're trying to get, have this conversation with this series, this photo series. So I think you did a very good job with sticking with the message that you're, and the conversation you're trying to have with people through this series. So
thank you.
Yeah, very good.
I'd just like to encourage anybody that has questions to go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we can kind of moderate that moving forward. But I just want to reiterate what Ash said. Thank you so much for shedding some light and honesty on this conversation. It's particularly difficult, I can only imagine, as a survivor, to be so vulnerable in a very public way. So thank you for that. And the imagery is just so so striking, but the conversations that you bring with it is it just lends a whole new lens to each of those works. I mean, they're just so stunning, but when those words are next to them, it just brings a whole new perspective to the works. I guess one of the questions that I was just kind of pondering is, you had the 7 piece was your wedding dress. Are any of the other dresses in the imagery iconic in any way, or symbolize anything to you, or is it just part of the prop?
Oh yeah, no, I'm very purposeful with everything that I add in, to the point that it's a little bit obnoxious to some of the people that I shoot with, because I'm like, no, it has to be this. Where everything I choose now, as you were able to see in some of the behind the scenes pictures, that the dress was originally yellow, and through color toning I changed it to the kind of this minty soft green. And so I wanted the dress to be vintage, because I wanted to showcase how this experience is timeless. This experience has been ongoing, and this is something that is ongoing as far back as we know, and it into the future. And so for me, using kind of a vintage dress, but everything is still kind of modern, makes it so that it looks like this could take place at any time. And then I use the green in the dress to represent a kind of softness to the person, that they are adding to the idea of, and kind of reinforcing the idea that this is a victim by using a soft color.
That's lovely. So we do have some questions coming in. Donna is asking if this is, well, thank you so much for sharing your story with art. And is this the first time you've put your story out in this way?
This particular story, yes. But I've always been very, very vocal about other things that I've experienced. Since I just recently, it was literally a year and a month ago that I left domestic violence, and that's how long it took me to make this series, because I knew that this was something that needed to be talked about. But other series, other series that I've done, I address equally hard subject matter. I've never shied away from that. I very much so like to combine my activism and my art. I don't know any other way to do it. I get, whenever I read something or experience something, that the first thing that happens is I get these images in my head, and they are the kind of the precursor to what you see in front of you with my art. That it's, I think visually, and I think in these images, and I think in painting like photographs. And that probably comes from a background of loving art history and the pre-Raphaelites and German Expressionism. And so it's always influenced by all the things that I see. But I've never shied away from addressing very hard subject matter. And if anybody's worried about talking about this when I'm still in the midst of, custody issues and things like that, my attorney came right out and said, go for it, do it. So
that's amazing. Good advocate. So, and then Ada says, do you ever address the issues in regards to men being abused physically or verbally, and about the embarrassment that sometimes this stuff is not reported or acts like it doesn't exist because men are supposedly so strong that this would be a difficult conversation to have?
I do talk about that within my activism, especially because both men and women with disabilities are the most at risk for caretaker violence, along with domestic violence. So that's something that I address within my activism, but I don't address in my art, because I always pull from personal experience with my art, and I can't speak to that experience. So whatever it is that I'm presenting, whatever issue it is that I'm bringing up, that I always try to come from a place that it's from something that I've personally experienced, because I don't want to talk for someone. I can talk for myself, and then by talking for myself, I can then advocate for my community, my disability community as a whole. But I can't speak to somebody else's experience, such as anyone that was assigned male at birth, or any of their experiences with domestic violence, because it's not my experience.
That makes a lot of sense. Question from Noelle. You talk of your resilience. You said you consider yourself lucky to not put up walls. Do you think this is something that's inherent in your being, or do you have to work on not pushing people away and having walls, or even being fearful of people, or both?
I think it's just my personality and the way that I am. And I think that as I grew older and being so heavily involved with disability advocacy, that it really taught me from an early age as an adult, about 18, 19 years old, that people are individuals, and almost every day of my life is talking about how disabled people are individuals, how we have wants and dreams and desires and all of these things. So I think it just kind of also, you say it enough, it becomes true, that it becomes the way you think. So I think that it's partly, like I said, it's partly me and just the way that I am. I think there is an aspect to it that maybe that makes me naive. But I'd rather be naive and give people opportunities than cut them out and expect the worst of them.
Thanks. So looks like one of our last questions here. Terry asks, did you feel like this series was part of your therapy?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. That I felt like I had to do this series, that it was really the only way for me to get the images out of my head. That there are times when I talk about what happens and I try to talk about it as if it happened to someone else. And so that's why I created a character, and why I didn't model for this myself when I've done that in the past. And that I needed that separation. I needed to be able to look at it from an outsider's perspective, in order to process it, then process the feelings that were associated with each image. So it was very much so, working through and then even going in and doing the edits for it, that was also very therapeutic for me, and working through a lot of the things that happened. I'm obviously still in therapy, still, trying to work through a lot of the trauma that comes from, domestic violence and sexual assault. But it very much so, the more I worked on it, the more I could talk about it. And the more then I got kind of the courage to be so publicly open about it, that it was when I was making some of the props for this series that I then made a public post on Facebook about what happened. And so it absolutely helped me through the process, especially the first couple of months after leaving.
Well, thank you so much. This has just been really enlightening in regards to the exhibition in our space currently. It really helps me to be able to talk to people in person, and share your story through your images. And so for anybody that maybe hasn't seen the show in person, KCAC is open to the public. We do have some restrictions as far as guests entering the space because of the pandemic, but we're in the galleries Wednesdays through Saturdays from 11 to 5. We do have a 5-person restriction, wear a mask, or we can provide one for you. Jessica has graciously made hundreds now of masks, so we're happy to share. But thank you so much, Kathryne, for doing this. Thank you, Ash, for helping to moderate. Thank you, Jessica, for helping to put this together. Such an important conversation, and I hope you all don't stop talking about this here. And I hope you can come see the show. And if you have questions, Kathryne, we can get you all in touch with Kathryne and continue this conversation beyond KCAC and Zoom. So thank you, everybody. We're wrapping up. Kathryne, do you have anything last minute that you want to say? Or
So on June 17th, 6 p.m. Zoom, I will be having a panel discussion. It will be with myself, disabled artist, a disabled person who has experienced domestic violence, as well as the, hoops and things you have to jump through, and the things that you experience leaving domestic violence as a disabled person, as well as 2 representatives from Safe Home.
Awesome. Brilliant. Well, tune in next week to that. And in the meantime, join us in the galleries until the end of the month. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night. Be safe.